What has North Korea got, Mick, to sell that Russia or others can't make themselves?
Well, I think there's a couple of key things, Greg, that they might be able to offer. Firstly, artillery ammunition. Both sides are desperately short of it, and if the North Koreans were to provide that, that would help Russia, notwithstanding some of the qualitative issues with what North Korea produces. And things like tank barrels, artillery barrels, these kind of things, which also run short at the moment, will probably find good homes from a Russian perspective in the Russian army.
And what does this then suggest about China? Does it suggest categorically that it is holding firm to its own commitments about not selling arms to Russia if Russia is then having to turn to countries like North Korea?
Well, it looks that way, although China is clearly providing dual-use technologies and machinery to Russia, particularly things with chips in it that might be reused for precision munitions. And we shouldn't forget that if the president of North Korea wants to visit Russia, he'll probably have to go through China at some point in time as well. So China may not be providing arms to Russia, but it's not doing a lot to stop it either.
And would that be considered an offence or a breach of some kind of sanction if China were to facilitate that overland travel? Yeah, the suggestion is it could be in some kind of armoured train.
I think China will stay within the lines, but it will go right up to them. It is a careful balancing act here with its national security concerns as well as economic concerns.
Yeah, well, the US seems fairly convinced. Let's see where that takes us. We'll know about it, I'm sure, if and when it does happen. Why don't we go within Ukraine itself now, Mick, and changes to the Defence Ministry. Why has Volodymyr Zelenskyy decided that it is necessary to replace Defence Minister Reznikov? Was he corrupt, or did he oversee corruption within the ministry?
No, there's no suggestion at all that Defence Minister Oleksii Reznikov is corrupt in any way. He's being held accountable for some failings by people in his department that he didn't appoint. Initially this year, there was a scandal around overpricing of eggs. More recently, there's been a scandal over the overpricing of jackets. So he's being held accountable, even though he is not directly responsible.
All right. And his replacement, what does that tell us? New Minister Umerov, what does it tell us about President Zelenskyy's priorities with that appointment?
Well, Rustem Umerov, who's in charge of the State Property Fund at the moment, has been working with the EU on a whole range of different issues not related to the military over the last 18 months. So he'll have a network to bring with him as Defence Minister, and that'll be very important in getting military aid. He's also a Tatar from Crimea, which will keep the focus on that area as if they need any more focus on it. He's known to be scrupulously honest and not interested in money. So he seems to be a good choice, and we'll see how he goes.
And that Crimean connection that you mentioned there has meant through his working career that apparently Minister Umerov's ties to Turkey are quite strong. Do you see any significance there in maybe getting him to re-engage around the grain deal?
Well, Turkey has been an arms supplier to Ukraine. The president of Ukraine and Turkey recently were photographed together with the president of Ukraine thanking him. So that is a very important relationship for Ukraine in a maritime sense, but also in an arms sense. So that will be a good network that he'll bring with him as well.
All right, yeah, changing of the guard there. Why don't we go to the front lines, though? Small gains on the southern front of late, particularly in the last 3 to 4 days, I think, Mick, with the offensive being mounted by Ukrainian forces. How much more ground does it need to make towards the Sea of Azov if it is to really compound this relatively small gain into real pressure on Russian forces?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting points to note here. Firstly, the commander on the southern front has stated that the Russians, in manning these 3 defensive lines, had about 60% of their troops in the first line, which the Ukrainians have busted through, and only about 20% in each of the subsequent lines. That could see things change very quickly over the coming weeks with the Ukrainian advance. The other thing, too, is the Ukrainians don't have to go all the way to the Sea of Azov. They just need to be within firing distance with artillery and HIMARS. that would make Russia's life extraordinarily difficult in the south as well as in Crimea.
And do you think, just based on the more recent gains, that that is within their scope, within their grasp to get within artillery range?
I think it is. I think we've seen accumulation of pressure on the Russians in the south and in the east. They show signs of breaking with having to rush in additional reserves. So we could see some very interesting developments in the coming weeks.
All right. And look, just finally, Mick, I think there's been some secrecy shrouding Australia's donation or sale of those anti-drone systems for Ukraine. What do we know about how successful that addition has been?
Well, clearly, both sides are desperate for more anti-drone defences. I mean, we're seeing thousands of these things in the air at once, and the investment in counter-drone technologies before the war lagged drone technology. So the Ukrainians will be keen to get whatever they want. This is a very clever technology the Australians have developed, and I'm sure it'll be much appreciated by the Ukrainians when it arrives on the front.
Yeah, I think it's awaiting a little bit further development, if not approval. We'll see about that. And Mick Ryan, talk about this and other matters again next week. Thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thanks, Greg. Great to talk to you again.